Hi, thank you all for coming and joining us. This is a very important meeting for us. We took a lot of time in revising the program and thinking about the strategic approaches that we wanted to have so that we can have meaningful outcomes. So this is really important to us, and the Women's Major Group has been co-chairing the coordination mechanism for just February. And we have been very happy to work along the Together 2030 with Nayara, because we started thinking on how to move this on board, and all the major groups and other stakeholders were working together. So it is very interesting that the coordination mechanism is so new. I don't know if you know about it, but if you don't, we invite you in a very heartfelt manner to join us. It's a very open space, so you can either join either of the major groups or the groups that are known as other stakeholders, or you can also participate if you're not interested in an organized or formal coordination manner, but we are still trying to advocate for everybody to have a voice. So this meeting is about that, and we are very interested in hearing your voices. What are your concerns? What are your priorities? And trying to figure out together how are we going to approach HLPF. So this is a very interesting format because we are trying precisely to make the best out of your expertises. So we will have different spaces to discuss whether you come from reporting countries or you want to have more engagement with strategies, or you want to follow through back home with communications and so on. So we will go through the agenda. But to us it's really important that you know that no matter in what way you want to be involved, there will always be a space for you. That's what the coordination mechanism is all about. So there's a steering group in the coordination mechanism, but we're only facilitating your space. It's like an empty seat, and what we want is to rotate that seat so that every voice and every opinion comes together to have a say in that seat. And that seat has been set aside to have a voice with the highest standards of human rights, for gender equality, sustainability criteria, to speak on transparency, on accountability. And we have devised all these principles that you will hear more about them in the future. But this is, if you have anything to say about anything in a manner in which all these principles can have the highest standards, then you're most welcome to use this space for you to raise your voice.
Accessibility is to have someone that can guide a blind person around the UN building, but it's also to have large print material. So we really request your collaboration and your commitment to ensure that the group of persons with disabilities can fully participate by making sure that all accessible standards, which is part of one important article of the CRPD, the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability, is no longer a dream, but it's now a reality for all of us. Thank you very much.
The HLPF has a very ambitious task. Not only is it supposed to follow up on the 2030 Agenda implementation and the SDGs, but also carry on all the other mandates that it had received from the 2012 Rio Plus 20 conference. One of the key novel features of the HLPF is that it is tasked with receiving national reports by volunteering member states on their implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. We had the first set of these types of voluntary reviews last year when 22 member states pioneered and presented their reports. And this year, as you are all very familiar, we have a record number of 44 countries that are coming to the HLPF and presenting their reports. These reports that are presented at the HLPF, in most cases, there have been extensive national processes that have led to their elaboration. There are a number of guidelines that the UN has provided to these member states that are supposed to guide the preparation of these reports, including the very important aspect of engaging stakeholders throughout the preparation of these reports at the national level. Interest in the HLPF has grown exponentially over the past few years. Just to put this into context, in 2015, 2 years ago, we had 700 stakeholders who registered to take part. This year, in 2017, we have over 2,400 stakeholders who have registered to come. So this, together with a number of member states who are presenting their reports, just shows the tremendous interest that exists out there in this high-level political forum. And we are very happy that you are part of this journey with us. First and foremost, we have prepared a detailed information note, which is available on our website. I really urge all of you to read this information note thoroughly. It contains a number of important points, logistical points, that you need to be aware of that will help your participation throughout the 10 days. The program of the HLPF reflects the two types of reviews that the HLPF will be doing. The first 5 days, which will unfold next week, are structured around the thematic review that the HLPF is supposed to be doing on the overarching theme of this session, which is eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world. And also doing a thematic review of the 7 SDGs that are in focus during this session. And these SDGs are, of course, SDG 1 on poverty, SDG 2 on hunger, SDG 3 on health, SDG 5 on gender, SDG 9 on industrialization, SDG 14 on oceans, and then the overarching SDG 17, which is means of implementation. The HLPF will be doing this thematic review of the theme and these 7 SDGs by holding a number of dedicated roundtable discussions, which will all feature experts who are coming to present the latest state of play, where we stand with the implementation of these SDGs, and then each roundtable will also be featuring an open Q&A portion, where also major groups and other stakeholders will be able to intervene, make comments, etc. There's also going to be a dedicated session which will look at the interlinkages between these SDGs, considering the fact that this agenda is really should be considered as a whole. So this is the first 5 days and the thematic review. The last 3 days of the HLPF, which will be held from 17 to 19 July, will be held at the high-level ministerial level. And this will be the moment when member states will be presenting their voluntary national reports to the HLPF. The schedule is available on our website in the program, including the order in which the member states will be presenting their reports. This year's member states that are volunteering have been able to choose the format for their presentations. A number of them have decided to present their reports in a panel-style setting, where their representatives will be making intervention, followed by a joint Q&A from the floor. Then we have a set of other member states who have rather decided to do individual presentations instead, which means that for these individual presentations, the member states who have opted for that format will make their presentation, and then there will be an opportunity for participants from the floor to ask questions from that particular member state. Let me then just say a few words about the outcome of the HLPF and some of the key documents that are before this session. The outcome of the HLPF, it is hoped, will be a negotiated ministerial declaration on the theme and the 7 SDGs. Negotiations on a draft are still ongoing. The facilitation of this draft is being done by the permanent representatives of Austria and Jamaica to the UN. And major groups and other stakeholders have been able to engage throughout the negotiations by making both written and oral contributions to the process. As many of you know, the co-facilitators held a round of discussions last week on a revised draft. We understand that it is their intention to present a final draft to be presented sometime early next week, and it will be presented to member states for silence procedure, which means that it will no longer be negotiated in an open setting. As soon as this final draft is available, we will of course share it with you. So that's the outcome of the HLPF. The other outcome of the HLPF will be a summary of the president of ECOSOC, who is overseeing the HLPF proceedings, which will seek to capture all the key points and recommendations that are made throughout the different sessions. Let me just say a few last words about some of the key documents that are before this session, and I hope that you have had a chance to look at those. Firstly, there is the second SDG progress report that has been prepared by the UN Statistics Division, and that presents a global and regional overview of where we stand with implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. This progress report will be introduced to the HLPF, and it will really act as sort of the backdrop for many of the discussions. There's a number of other documents as well. These are all posted on the HLPF website. But I would really like to draw your attention to the position papers that have been submitted by the different major groups and other stakeholders on the theme of the HLPF. And these are your constituency views on the theme. These are all available on our website, and the executive summaries of these papers have been issued as an official document of the HLPF. On the question of the Q&A portions that will follow each VNR, let me just at the onset say that this year we have a tremendous challenge in accommodating 44 voluntary national presentations by member states in 3 days, and it is a very intensive schedule, and time is very limited, unfortunately. So we are expecting that each VNR presentation, there will only be time for less than 10 minutes for questions and answers from the floor, including from member states and stakeholders. Now, considering that there are over 2,400 stakeholders who have registered, and there will likely be time for one or maximum 2 questions from stakeholders for each country. These questions are prepared jointly in a coordinated manner, There is a coordination process going on. I believe you will address this later today, how you can contribute to these joint questions. And also you are self-selecting who will be raising these questions from each member state. But just to note that unfortunately there is very limited time for these questions, but we are delighted that member states are committed to continue last year's practice and to allow for at least some questions also from stakeholders. So thanks. First and foremost, we have prepared a detailed information note which is available on our website. I really urge all of you to read this information note thoroughly. It contains a number of important points, logistical points, that you need to be aware of that will help your participation throughout the 10 days. The program of the HLPF reflects the two types of reviews that the HLPF will be doing. The first 5 days, which will unfold next week, are structured around the thematic review that the HLPF is supposed to be doing on the overarching theme of this session, which is eradicating poverty and promoting prosperity in a changing world. And also doing a thematic review of the 7 SDGs that are in focus during this session. And these SDGs are, of course, SDG 1 on poverty, SDG 2 on hunger, SDG 3 on health, SDG 5 on gender, SDG 9 on industrialization, SDG 14 on oceans, and then the overarching SDG 17, which is means of implementation. The HLPF will be doing this thematic review of the theme and these 7 SDGs by holding a number of dedicated roundtable discussions, which will all feature experts who are coming to present the latest state of play, where we stand with the implementation of these SDGs, and then each roundtable will also be featuring an open Q&A portion, where also major groups and other stakeholders will be able to intervene, make comments, etc. There's also going to be a dedicated session which will look at the interlinkages between these SDGs, considering the fact that this agenda is really should be considered as a whole. So this is the first 5 days and the thematic review. The last 3 days of the HLPF, which will be held from 17 to 19 July, will be held at the high-level ministerial level. And this will be the moment when member states will be presenting their voluntary national reports to the HLPF. The schedule is available on our website in the program, including the order in which the member states will be presenting their reports. This year's member states that are volunteering have been able to choose the format for their presentations. A number of them have decided to present their reports in a panel-style setting, where their representatives will be making intervention, followed by a joint Q&A from the floor. Then we have a set of other member states who have rather decided to do individual presentations instead, which means that for these individual presentations, the member states who have opted for that format will make their presentation, and then there will be an opportunity for participants from the floor to ask questions from that particular member state. Let me then just say a few words about the outcome of the HLPF. and some of the key documents that are before this session. The outcome of the HLPF, it is hoped, will be a negotiated ministerial declaration on the theme and the 7 SDGs. Negotiations on a draft are still ongoing. The facilitation of this draft is being done by the permanent representatives of Austria and Jamaica to the UN. And major groups and other stakeholders have been able to engage throughout the negotiations by making both written and oral contributions to the process. As many of you know, the co-facilitators held a round of discussions last week on a revised draft. We understand that it is their intention to present a final draft to be presented sometime early next week, and it will be presented to member states for silence procedure, which means that it will no longer be negotiated in an open setting. As soon as this final draft is available, we will of course share it with you. So that's the outcome of the HLPF. The other outcome of the HLPF will be a summary of the president of ECOSOC, who is overseeing the HLPF proceedings, which will seek to capture all the key points and recommendations that are made throughout the different sessions. Let me just say a few last words about some of the key documents that are before this session, and I hope that you have had a chance to look at those. Firstly, there is the second SDG progress report that has been prepared by the UN Statistics Division, and that presents a global and regional overview of where we stand with implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. This progress report will be introduced to the HLPF, and it will really act as sort of the backdrop for many of the discussions. There's a number of other documents as well. These are all posted on the HLPF website. But I would really like to draw your attention to the position papers that have been submitted by the different major groups and other stakeholders on the theme of the HLPF. And these are your constituency views on the theme. These are all available on our website, and the executive summaries of these papers have been issued as an official document of the HLPF. Most of the HLPF meetings will be held in Conference Room 4, which many of you know is the largest conference room in the UN after the General Assembly Hall. Nevertheless, with the volume of participants we are having this year, there is not space to accommodate everybody inside Conference Room 4, unfortunately. Therefore, there will be overflow room every day available also inside the premises, where those of you who cannot access the Conference Room 4 will be able to also follow the proceedings. The gallery seating is shared between stakeholders, UN system, and also member states who cannot fit on the floor of Conference Room 1. So as you can imagine, space is limited, but we have set aside 1/3 of the gallery for stakeholders to be able to sit, and we have clearly marked seats for stakeholders. To enter the gallery will also require a special ticket because space is so limited. These special tickets for seats in the gallery are distributed every morning from a dedicated desk in the visitors' entrance. The details of the distribution are all outlined in the information note.
I'm Eleanor Blomstrom, one of the organizing partners from the Women's Major Group, and also I work at the Women's Environment and Development Organization here in New York. So, I'm here to talk about exciting paragraph 89, and the question is, what is paragraph 89, and why do we want to talk about it today? So, for starters, it's in the follow-up and review section at the end of Agenda 2030. And that's the section that's outlining follow-up and review and reporting to the HLPF and at all levels. And importantly, missing from that section is the word accountability. So I think this discussion around paragraph 89 is also about accountability. Most of this section talks about member state responsibilities. And given that member states or governments are duty bearers, they have a duty to their citizens and residents to respect, protect, and promote human rights. And they also have a duty to undertake implementation of sustainable development policies. And that makes sense given their role. But it leads me to a question that I'll bring up in just a minute or two. So one of the major reasons then to address paragraph 89 is that it's one of the paragraphs in the agenda that specifically mentions major groups and other stakeholders. And those of you in the room who've been doing this for a while know we worked tirelessly for years and years to make sure that we were well represented, meaningfully participating, and really part of Agenda 2030. So it's critical that we understand all the places where we're represented. Then there are also two other paragraphs in that section that talk about either stakeholders or relevant stakeholders. And one of them is really just that there should be open and inclusive reporting by relevant stakeholders or support to stakeholders to participate in that. And that there should be a platform for partnerships, including participation of major groups and other stakeholders. So let me read you the first paragraph of the first sentence of paragraph 89. The HLPF will support participation in follow-up and review processes by the major groups and other relevant stakeholders in line with Resolution 67/290. So what's that resolution? Basically, it talks about how the HLPF should be organized. And there's an important paragraph that explains what our rights are within the HLPF, which includes attending meetings, access to documents, intervening in official meetings, submitting documents, making recommendations, and organizing events. And this is critical, and we bring this up every year. But do we see this happening, is my question. Lato mentioned the VNRs, the review sessions. Do the 2 minutes that we'll have as major groups and other stakeholders to make our self-organized questions in these sessions, do they count for supporting our participation in the follow-up and review? And as many of you know, we've often called for really all of us, different NGOS groups, a more interactive dialogue that can review each state's progress in implementing the 2015 agenda, or the 2030 agenda, sorry. And then my other question is, are we already doing this through our own reports, through our own thematic reports that we've already submitted through the other work and advocacy that we do? But then we get to the second sentence, which says, we call on these actors to report on their contribution to the implementation of the agenda. And so really, my question is, what does that mean? And it brings me back to what I alluded to earlier. Do the major groups and other stakeholders have an obligation to report on their contribution to this process? Who are we as major groups and other stakeholders? And what is our commitment obligation? What is our moral obligation? What is our own sort of personal obligation to do this reporting? Are we duty bearers? Maybe some of you are. Are we rights holders? Yes, pretty much everyone. And that means different levels of power, different levels of interaction. So the question is, what would these reports look like? What is expected of us from the outside, from the member states themselves, or from ourselves? Sorry, okay, I have 1 more minute. So those are my big questions that I wanted to put out there that I think we need to discuss in our breakout sessions around this role of duty bearers and rights holders, and what does that look like in terms of a report. But I also want to highlight some really important efforts that were made last year by a task group that was set up among this coordination mechanism to come up with guidelines for our own reporting. And it really had 2 important pieces to it. The first part was about what is our contribution to programs and activities, and how are we contributing to this policy and enabling environment. But the second piece is also about the progress challenges and recommendations from us. And this has to do with how we're holding governments accountable. What have we seen happening in the countries where we're based? And it's a really interesting document, and I think it can be read with lots of different perspectives. And I don't know that we spent too much time on it this year, many of us, because it's so new for us, the agenda. And we're trying to figure out, do we report as individual organizations? Do we report as constituencies? Do we do both? What is more critical? What needs to go in there? This year, as a matter of fact, there were, I think, 6 reports submitted to DESA so far that I was told about, which is not many. One by Science and Technology, and the rest by individual organizations. And they all took a different way, a different perspective on the report, and they were between 2 and I think about 15 pages. So I encourage you to find them on the website and look at them, but also to think about what is this challenge that we're up to here with the reporting? What should we do? What autonomy do we have? And what are our next steps?
Because it's about opportunities and strategy. But in my mind, we need to talk first about strategy, then to find the opportunities. So what is the strategy? We all know that we come from different contexts and realities, but what are we all here for? First of all, we have been discussing this over and over, and we think that it is to bring back the relevance of multilateralism. In a world in which we face so many challenges that sometimes not even the most powerful region in the world can overcome on its own, such as, for instance, climate change, we need to find global solutions. So HLPF is an opportunity for that. Especially we want to highlight the strategy for democratic governance. We just had the G20 meeting last week, and but all the small countries couldn't be there. So many decisions are being taken outside a democratic space like the UN, and we want to really bring back all the power to the UN so that even small countries can have a say on the table, so that decisions are not made on behalf of them and impact the entire world. So this is the first message that we really need to have. The other thing this is a universal agenda, and this means that we really need to have all the countries reporting, including northern countries, on their externalities, meaning what is their impact in the global south, and how, for instance, as well, they're shying away from the commitments on delivering on official development assistance, but also on regulating on the illicit financial flows or the tax evasion that leaves 30 trillions from the global south to the north, whereas we know that it only takes 3 trillions to eradicate poverty. So this is something that we really must address in these platforms. And also, we really want to highlight the need to address systematic or structural barriers. Why? Because there is this emphasis on national implementation, but unless obstacles are removed, governments and countries, or even regions, they cannot just fulfill the commitments without removing these obstacles. So we believe, yes, it is really important to ask for national accountability, but also to find what are the challenges and obstacles at the national level or at the regional level, so that we come here at the global level and ask for solutions. So this is why the ministerial declaration is so important to us. We don't want to have a repetition of commitments. We want to know how are they mapping the challenges, the obstacles, and how they are going to solve them. And in 2019, we will have a revision of the agenda. So it's really important that each ministerial declaration has an addition analysis of challenges and proposals for solution, because then in 2019 we will be able to review the agenda. So if you know that there are omissions in the 2030 agenda, this is the moment to bring them and to try to have an advocacy not only this year but next year, so that we can have a message sent for the revision in 2019. So, for instance, concentration of wealth and the social and environmental impacts is not in the agenda. stronger accountability mechanisms and their linkages to binding instruments, or for instance, in the case of women's major group, we see that there is an omission in the case of human rights defenders and environmentalists. So these are messages that this is the opportunity to bring this message. Or also, what we are saying is that the integrity and the integrality of the SDGs have not been recognized, so that countries are reporting only in the clusters and the specific goals rather than the integrality of them. So this is a year in which we need to highlight, as Mexico was saying, and was left alone, that we need to report the whole SDGs every year, because otherwise we run the risk of cherry picking and then leaving aside maybe very crucial goals and targets. So that's the strategy. What are the opportunities? I mean, I think Laura mentioned many of them, but then, so we have the roundtables, and for sure you need to get the special ticket, but there is also the space for the overflow room and the webcast, but you need to really try to engage. For instance, in side events, there will be many interesting discussions, so side events are really crucial. Inside and outside the formal program, we will have a side event with VNR countries, organized with the major groups and other stakeholders. So that's also an opportunity, because what we wanted was to have in the same room the governments and the citizens, so that you can have an exchange. Unfortunately, it's going to be in a small room. It's on the 12th from 6:15 to 7:30. You will find this in the program in conference room A. But these are very good opportunities precisely to bring up these messages. And for sure to attend the Morning Coordination meeting in the Trusteeship Council the first week. And there is still time to post a question for the DNR countries. The process will go until 11th of July. So sign up to either send your question, either thematic or national content, or even cross-cutting issues. And you can also sign up to post the question for the VNR countries on the second week. So there is still time to do that. Please do so, because we need a very vital dialogue with member states. You should also, hopefully, volunteer for note-taking, because then we can map what are the regression position or what are the progressive position. Please do take notes, and please share your analysis with others. For sure, the communications is so important, not only to share messages, but also because we need you to do the translation thematically and to different languages, to go back to the regions and to have a meaningful message that is sent back home, and we don't need to be all here in New York. And also to send specific messages and problems, the ones that you know you are experts on, so you can share those with us. So there will be a general debate, so we will have one intervention per major groups and other stakeholders, so that's also a way. You can engage in the coordination mechanism, as I said, or also through the different major groups and other stakeholders. If you're interested, many organizing partners and many focal points of all these groups are here, so if you're interested in one of them, just go and try to find them or ask us. But if you're also very keen on your independence, there is also going to be opportunities for you to participate. Just engage and come and bring all your great ideas. Thank you.
As I mentioned, there has been a communications team active since very early May, trying to figure out, what our strategy is around communications collectively. And for those of you who are arriving now, we welcome your involvement. So the first thing that we try to figure out as this team, and for communications for the major groups and other stakeholders in general, is what are our objectives as a sort of concerted collective effort on communications and social media. What are we trying to achieve? So our objectives, as we've defined them so far, and as I said, we really welcome your ideas and additions or deletions, if it comes to that, are to amplify our work. So while we strive to have some joint messaging, as Amelia was saying, we're not trying to consolidate all of the diversity of perspectives of all of our individual organizations as well as the constituencies in which we participate. But one message that I think is common to all of us is inclusion and participation. So we will try to put forward with member states, with the UN, our message of, here's why you need to include us. I mean, first of all, because it's mandated by the agenda, but also because we have a lot to offer and because we're a key part of the accountability or the follow-up and review, as it may be, of the agenda. So amplify our work, facilitate our communications to echo joint messaging where it may exist, and then importantly, connecting journalists who might be covering the HLPF, both locally in New York and then all over the world, especially in the BNR countries, to the experts and the representatives who are here for the HLPF. So we see ourselves as having a role not to speak for anyone, but to make sure that the media that are covering this know whom to talk to about different issues and different country perspectives. And then finally, to put out some powerful messages, some strong narratives, to put faces to the realities of what we are trying to adjust here with the SDGs, to praise and raise, so to find examples of governments that are doing a good job to kind of balance out our very necessary criticism, and to just make sure that we have out there in the world as much as possible some coverage of what you all are doing. So those are our objectives, again, open for additions and discussion. And then the elements of how we're going to do this. We have three main elements. One is our online space. So I've sent out a couple emails about this to the major groups and other stakeholders coordination mechanism listserv. If you're not on that or if you want more information, come to my table during the breakout session. But the one-stop shop online space is really the key landing point for major groups and other stakeholders' communications. And we're grateful to Action for Sustainable Development for offering a section of their website which can be this semi-autonomous major groups and other stakeholders space. So on that, we will have a place where you can list yourself as a contact for press for your particular constituency, stakeholders group, major group, or if you, for example, are involved with one of the thematic clusters. You can email us. The email is mgoshlpf@gmail.com, and I also have that written down, so if you didn't write it down, don't worry. And we will list you on the contacts page of that site so that media can find you. If you have a press release, a statement, something that you want both to go up on, you can email DESA and have them put it on their page, and you can also have it on our major groups and other stakeholders online space. And then maybe most excitingly, we have an events calendar. So as was raised this morning, there's been some delay in DESA being able to capture all of the unofficial side events as promised. And in addition, even when those are all compiled by DESA, we thought it was really important to have a space as major groups and other stakeholders where we can list our events and publicize on each other's behalf. So that's the online space. Then in terms of press, there's a press release that's in draft form that will be ready to go out tomorrow or Tuesday, and it includes an interesting HLPF by the numbers, emphasizing some of what Lata told us this morning about how many people are engaged, how many people are coming here from all over the world. We think this is really important, so journalists should too. And then in terms of the day-to-day, we'll have on-site coverage. We'll meet every morning at the major groups and other stakeholders coordination meetings at 8 in the Trusteeship Council chamber this first week. And we'll figure out, who's covering social media for what, who's going to what events, to make sure that we're really amplifying our messaging. So if you or one of your colleagues or perhaps an intern or your social media staff is planning to do that for your organization, this would be something we would really encourage you to either come or send them to for those morning meetings so that we can have our on-site squad and work together. So that's communications, and we hope you can all join. And even if you don't join the breakout group, please send me an email with your communications people so we can all amplify each other's work.
An emerging issue is something we haven't thought about but need to, or it's something we already know but is changing. So this is a bit generic, it's more of a non-peer reviewed kind of definition, less academic in nature. The more academic ones will just follow. The other way you can look at emerging issues is issues that have not been influential or important in the past, but that might be influential in the future. Now, something that's important to identify and understand the nuance here is the difference between what is a trend and what is an emerging issue. And that's on the next slide, but does anyone want to take a guess on what the difference could be, or do you have ideas in your head as to what a trend is as opposed to an emerging issue? Sorry.
Well, trends would be what is popular, and trends would be what is popular.
Versus what someone thought of that's totally original.
I mean, I'm not an expert on the topic, I'm just trying to reflect the mandate of the HLPF, but we'll see. So, strictly speaking, a trend is a historical change over time and describes history. Now you can read the rest. I mean, it's at some point we can decide that for any particular issue, certain variables or changes were important, and we decided to collect data on that variable over time. The rising price of a barrel of oil, the growing number of individuals with an iPhone, the diminishing number of individuals with middle class incomes are all examples of trends and not emerging issues. Now when we get into the nuance difference between a trend and an emerging issue, this is what we have. If a trend is a historical change until the present, then an emerging issue is a possible new technology, a potential public policy issue, or a new concept or idea that, while perhaps fringe thinking today, could mature and develop into a critical mainstream issue in the future or become a major trend on its own. And of course, there's a lot of debate on what constitutes an emerging issue as to what constitutes a trend. There is no central authority which ascertains what is what, but there is a sense in the context of the conversation we are having with the backdrop of the 2030 agenda and sustainable development in general. So some examples of emerging issues that come up in a lot of literature are listed here. So for example, migration. When the 2030 agenda was being negotiated, the issue of migration was not so high on the global discourse. And if you see, the agenda is actually quite weak on issues related to migration. And now there are 3 intergovernmental frameworks that are going to focus on migration by the end of next year. So this is all after the 2030 agenda. So how can the ministerial declaration, for example, reflect migration to keep the discussions at the HLPF relevant? This was discussed quite hotly at the negotiations for the ministerial declaration as well, and then you will see in the ministerial declaration that some of these issues are mentioned. Universal basic income, I mean, the theoretical concept has been around for a very long time, and of course I'm not taking a position on this topic, this is just reflecting a topic as is. There are lots of advantages and disadvantages to talk about this, and I'm sure our friends from the labor and trade unions major group would be able to give a qualitative assessment. But in terms of it being part of policy discourse is identified as a new and emerging issue. ILO actually now has a report on the future of work, and the next step from future of work is universal basic income. Whether it's good or bad is a separate issue, so that's being discussed. Automation could be a trend, but future of work becomes an emerging issue. Other concepts which have also been around for a very long time, but are gaining a little more traction now in terms of mainstream discourse as concepts are degrowth, ecological debt, stranded assets, and digital resilience. The concept of ecological debt, for example, I mean, is as old as CBDR or even older. It essentially says that, I mean, in the context of the UN, in the context of climate change and sustainable development, depends who you are. If it's in the context of sustainable development or not, depends which country you are. But it's very widely agreed that countries in the north have a ecological debt to countries in the south. Again, no view on that. Stranded assets, for example, is something that comes from the climate change literature. Anyway, the point here is not to get into the details of what these issues are, is to give examples. Something that people will be able to relate to more, which is a more mainstream and popular issue these days, and an emerging issue somewhat, is digital resilience. So in the whole discussion around resilience focuses on resilience against natural disasters and external and internal shocks, as the resolutions call them. But there is no talk of what this means for digital infrastructure.
Hi, good morning, everybody. As Katie has mentioned, I am Matt Simons from the International Trade Union Confederation, and we sort of coordinate the workers in trade union major group. So I'm going to just give a quick primer on the voluntary national reviews. I imagine most of you have a pretty good idea about what this covers, but perhaps bear with me for those that might not be as well informed on the issue. The voluntary national reviews, as they're called, are pretty much they're a central pillar of the sort of follow-up and review aspect of the Agenda 2030. These are complemented by kind of regional review processes and the global monitoring framework, but they really make up kind of the sort of the main component, let's say, of assessing progress at national level on the SDGs and targets. So basically, in broad terms, that's what they're meant to do. There's supposed to be presentations by governments that are country-owned and that are presented on an annual basis to the HLPF. They're voluntary in the sense that not every country reports every year. This is already mentioned by Lotta, but this year 44 countries will present the national reviews. First year there were 22. Next year there's already countries that are volunteering. This stuff, I guess, is all available on the Sustainable Development Platform portal. On the other hand, there is sort of kind of, I guess, tacit kind of assumption that every country will eventually report. So it's not really, I guess, it's not really voluntary in that sense. There is an expectation that over the course of the 15-year cycle of SDGs, that each country will report. I think our interpretation would be at least 3 or 4 times over the course of these 15 years. I don't know if that's actually written down anywhere, but it's twice as the sort of, let's say, mandatory number. Okay. We would hope for something a little bit more ambitious than that, I suppose. The volunteering countries, so they present these findings each year at the HLPF. There's one segment, so the HLPF is broken up into 2 segments. This is the thematic segment, which is the first week, and then there's the sort of high-level segment, which is supposed to be ministerial level, and that's where these PNRs are presented. They're meant to be sort of presented in a way where it creates kind of a dialogue where member states are engaged, let's say major groups and other stakeholders are engaged, and let's say UN agencies or other kind of entities are engaged. So the countries present, and then there's supposed to be some kind of exchange on what's been heard, kind of sharing of experiences, best practices, etc. The reality, I guess, perhaps is maybe a little bit different than that. I don't know if you participated last year. Just the volume of countries that are presenting in this kind of small window makes it really difficult to have any kind of really constructive dialogue in this setting. So that's probably one of the things we should maybe reflect on in our breakout working groups is, how we might improve this process, at least at the global level where they're presented. There's not really any common framework or blueprint for how countries are supposed to kind of develop or craft their national reviews. This is the sort of country ownership aspect of it. Countries are supposed to develop these national reviews within their kind of standing processes at national level, how they operate at national level. But there are some kind of general principles that are supposed to be, let's say, driving the national reviews, and these principles have sort of been agreed at the intergovernmental level. So these include things like the reviews themselves are supposed to cover the totality of the agenda, all the SDGs and targets. So it's not, we have each year we have kind of certain SDGs that are selected to be the thematic to inform the thematic segment of the agenda. Whereas the voluntary national reviews don't just focus on those SDGs, they should be covering the full range of SDGs and targets. And then the other important principle that, as let's say the non-executive actors or major groups and other stakeholders, that's really important for us is that they're supposed to be conducted in an open, transparent, and inclusive way. So effectively, when they're conducting these national reviews or making these assessments, they're supposed to consult, as a principle, they're supposed to consult at the national level, different actors within society. So it's not supposed to be a simply kind of executive government level driven process. So for this discussion, I think what will be important is to try to take some stock of how, following on that last point, to take stock at the national level. If we have people here that are from the national level, to take stock of whether or not this has happened, whether or not these reviews have been conducted in a sort of inclusive way, whether or not the contributions of major groups and other stakeholders can be seen, are they reflected in what's been prepared and what will be presented. Then I think on that basis we should also reflect on how perhaps at the national level they can be improved, whether or not there's some experiences that you can share in other processes, whether or not there's ways to sort of make this a more, this is, I guess, assuming that the process is inclusive. Of course, there's going to be examples where it is, but how to make the most effective use of this process, this follow-up and review process at national level. And then another element to consider would be the presentations to the HLPF. Lotte had mentioned earlier the sort of challenge in trying to, for us to try and engage these, given such sort of short time allocated for the kind of interactive dialogue. I think what will end up happening is, this is what happened last year at least, you'll have 2 minutes to respond to perhaps 3 presentations from 3 governments that have no connection whatsoever. So you're going to have to try and pull together some kind of common message addressing kind of completely different issues for completely different contexts. And whether or not this is actually a very constructive way to kind of present this information, whether or not there's sort of better examples of how we can do this and perhaps create a more meaningful and kind of constructive dialogue. So we have some guiding questions, but it's basically on the basis of those kind of reflections.
My name is Donovan, Science Policy Focal Point for the UN Age Group for Children and Youth. So one of the discussion groups is on science policy, so I'll give some historic background on what the science policy interface is, where does it stem from, and what are the sort of activities going on that might come up during the HLPF. So as mentioned by some of the other colleagues, the science policy interface is also a mandated follow-up area of Rio Plus 20, and to be reviewed at the high-level political forum. Every year there is a 3-hour session, usually on the Friday, on the science policy interface. However, given its important cross-cutting nature as a means of implementation for not only implementing, monitoring, and review the 2030 agenda and other frameworks, there's really a need to also enhance the stature and in order to have broader impact of science policy integrated throughout the entire week if possible and throughout the UN system a little bit more. So what does it include? Agenda 21, so back 1992, Chapter 35 is all on science policy. It focuses on using knowledge from the sciences, and this includes natural sciences, social sciences, engineering, etc., in decision-making processes. It also highlights the importance of bringing together the scientists, the policymakers, and society to discuss relevant matters and also overcome potential dissonance or inconsistencies in the language that we use and the timelines, both for science and policy making, and also in perspectives. So Agenda 21 highlights 4 different program areas of work. One is strengthening the scientific basis for sustainable development and sustainable management. So this is evidence-informed. The second is enhancing scientific understanding. This has to do with assessing trade-offs, interlinkages, systemic and emerging issues, which you heard about, generating knowledge, assessing knowledge, but also the methodologies that we use to do that, best practices and all that. The third is improving long-term scientific assessment, which can also include both intended and unintended consequences and behaviors of systems, and also primary, secondary, and additional effects within systems that aren't always directly measurable. And also includes technology foresight, which is quite difficult to do. And the fourth is building up scientific capacity and capability. So on a national level, this has to do with investments in science, R&D, etc. This is highlighted in several targets in Goal 9. There's also discussions on multilateral cooperation to enhance science and technology capacity. There's discussions, the recent launch of the Technology Bank for least developed countries, and also a section on technology in SDG 17 and the means of implementation. Different UN agencies have integrated the science policy component into their areas of work, into their work programs. So UNEA, the UN Environmental Assembly, hosts a science policy forum at their UNEA each year. UNISDR has a science technology advisory group that's developed a science technology roadmap to inform the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and so on. On a UN system-wide basis, previous Secretary General Ban Ki-moon established the Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board, which also served a similar purpose. The status of the board is unknown at this point. And all this was strengthened in 2012 in Rio Plus 20. Now getting into the other components of science policy is the whole discussion of science, tech, and innovation. So one of the bigger discussions around this is the outcome of the third conference on financing for development, where the technology facilitation mechanism was established. The TFN has three components. One is an annual multi-stakeholder forum on science, tech, innovation for the SDGs, which just took place 2 months ago. Some of you were there, I think. The second is an interagency task team of about 34 UN entities coordinating on science, technology, innovation across the UN system. And the third is an online platform on resources and best practices on using science, tech, innovation for SDGs, which is still under development. We'll see. Now be ready for next year. Another entity that works on this topic is the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. This is a functional organ of ECOSOC, which is housed in Geneva at UNCTAD, and they have annual meetings on topics. This year's topic, very appropriately, were food security, so linking to SDG 2, and also innovative approaches to implementing the 2030 agenda. There's also been enhanced emphasis on data. How can we ensure quality, accessible, timely, and reliable disaggregated data, both the collection, assessment, and reporting of it, and what type of resources do we need to enhance statistical capacities at national levels? Especially since we have 169 targets and they're all related in different ways. And also, how can we think about the interoperability of data and information systems between global, regional, national, and local levels, which is a big challenge. Earlier this year was the first ever World Data Forum, so that was quite interesting. And the last component of science policy is the GSDR, the Global Sustainable Development Report. This was an outcome also of Rio Plus 20. There were 3 editions that published in 2014, 2015, 2016. It's meant to be, and I quote, an assessment of assessments, drawing knowledge from throughout the UN system, as well as stakeholders in civil society. As of last year, the outcome of the 2016 Ministerial Declaration, the annual report was turned into a Cordino report. We were a little bit disappointed in this because a lot happens in a year, and that's why we also want to urge colleagues here to not only have to, and we should all contribute to the GSDR, but also we can each do our part in doing annual activities that are sort of in line with the GSDR. So for example, ICSU from the Science Technology Major Group is launching an amazing report on interlinkages with SDGs. You should definitely go to their site event. From the MTCY side, we've also done youth-led and peer-reviewed crowdsourced publications.